ICE raids were very successful. Many were taken out on Sunday. You just didn't know about it.
Hello everybody, my name is Raheem Jasani and welcome to The Unfortunate Truth. Much has happened over the past several weeks here in the States. In the Civil Rights Department, steps have been taken forward with Black Lives Matter protest. In the Pandemic Department, steps have been taken backwards with Floridians not wearing masks and idiots running for office. But today, I wanted to focus on a frustrating problem that has plagued the U.S. for over a decade.
To immigrant communities across the country bracing for an ICE crackdown to kick into high gear now, those deportation raids sparking new protests overnight.
Senators from both parties have reached a deal for more funding at the border, approximately $4.5 billion in border funding.
Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, has been getting lots of attention over the past few years. Both its purpose and actions have been questioned heavily by each political party during the past 8 years. ICE has constantly been on the media's radar for unethical detainments, the separation of families, targeting minorities, and traumatizing children. Despite political success in passing immigration reform, the question still must be asked. What's the deal with ICE? To look at what's wrong with ICE and immigration in this country, we have to look back to its origins. In 2003, the Bush administration created ICE with the purpose of removing undocumented immigrants from the United States who are a threat to public safety and national security. Now, although this sounds very reasonable, we know that today, ICE has been operating just a little bit differently.
President Donald Trump tweeted Monday that Immigration and Customs Enforcement will begin removing millions of immigrants who are in the U.S. illegally next week. The president didn't provide any further specifics beyond saying they will be removed as fast as they come in.
The two were separated 48 hours after arriving at the Texas border May 10th.
She had no idea where he was for the better part of 3 weeks, and she was distraught over it.
It's been 11 months and 12 days since Gredis last saw her two daughters. She joins other anxious parents. All of them were separated from their children at the U.S. border.
We all know that the current administration has been very critical about undocumented immigrants. As soon as he was elected into office, President Trump signed multiple executive orders to make ICE's deportation policies more strict. For instance, he increased the program's budget by $4 billion to hire an additional 10,000 ICE agents. He also increased the number of detention facilities and gave law enforcement more power when it came to arresting and detaining people. Furthermore, he expanded the priority list of non-citizens subject to deportation to anyone charged with a criminal offense. This means that when ICE conducts raids, it will target people with a type of criminal offense, even as simple as a traffic violation or jaywalking. In 2018, 21% of the undocumented immigrants arrested by ICE had committed minor crimes, and 58% had no prior convictions. This shows that the majority of immigrants detained by them aren't really actual criminals, but hardworking individuals that have families. And as ICE processes the parents of these families, and the legal system goes through with them, their children are separated and taken away from them.
Outrage outside a detention center in New Jersey today. Protesters railed against the Trump administration action that separates children from parents accused of violating immigration laws.
The problem? All those migrants accused of crossing into the U.S. illegally, detained in cages. And if they came with children, the children were taken from them. Such family separation sparked a huge outcry in this country.
Let the children go!
The family separation policy separated 4,368 children from their parents. It placed them in very difficult situations. Despite its intentions, Trump's policies weren't helping that many people because they were simply ousting tax-paying, hardworking families in the United States instead of focusing 100% of the time on criminals. Now, before the Democrats are like, yeah, screw Trump, this is his fault. We can't forget about the fact that President Obama was questionable policies too. But if you look at his rhetoric, it was completely the opposite, right? Even he said it himself. He was like, felons, not families, criminals, not children, gang members, not a mom who's working hard to provide for her kids. And he focused on major crimes, not misdemeanors. But he did separate families, but they were the ones who arrived in the United States more recently, rather than the ones who've lived here for several years, as this administration has constantly done. In addition, President Obama was also the one who created ICE detention centers and didn't have ways of checking up on them to make sure the centers are running humanely, which shouldn't be a thing, but should have been added in his bill. Consequently, the number of non-criminal deportations under the Obama administration went down. However, it cannot be ignored that even though a decrease occurred in the number of detained immigrants with no convictions, immigrants with no convictions still made 60% of the individuals contained during his time. So it's clear that regardless of what policy the federal government has, ICE systematically detains large numbers of undocumented immigrants who are not a threat to national security. So what's wrong with America's detainment system? Well, let me finish this Obama quote for you. He says, "We will prioritize, just like law enforcement does every day. But the reality is that regardless of who is in office, they aren't doing that."
So I was pulling up on the driveway to my aunt's house with my mother. I was held at gunpoint by a man that ran out and asked for my identifications along with my mother's. We complied. He took both our driver's licenses. Then he told us to get out of the car. I heard my mother scream and I found myself in handcuffs.
Why? Yeah. Because I have reason to believe you're not in the country legally.
In the video, you hear him repeatedly asking the ICE agents to leave.
Listen, I know that no one lives here. This is considered a place of business. You guys are here to work. They live downstairs.
Later, the agent offers a different argument.
So you guys are just going to stay in here without being invited in? You guys don't have a warrant?
Okay,
nothing?
when you opened the door for me and construed where Carlos was, I construed that information to enter.
At what point did I say he is here? At what point did I say come in? At what point? Can you please tell me?
What you see is ICE agents flagrantly violating the U.S. Constitution by entering into a home without consent and without a warrant.
Tonight, we continue to take a closer look at ICE's wrongful detainment of a U.S. veteran from Grand Rapids.
You see, President Obama made the assumption that ICE agents will only go for criminals and not to be mixed with families, right? And don't deport anybody who didn't deserve to be deported. A fair assumption. But this didn't hit reality. And so in addition to placing kids in detention centers and separating families, the agency has been reported for multiple civil rights organizations for violations of racial profiling, unwarranted arrests, and violations of due process. But Raheem, these are criminals, right? Who cares? But before you reach this conclusion, let's see how actually ICE detains people. So let's start with how they conduct their raids. ICE receives a list from multiple sources such as the DMV and the National Database of Criminals, and works with the local police to collaborate a list of people or places to raid, which on paper once again sounds nice, but let's take another closer look. Many of these databases have civil immigration information on it, which includes people's deportation dates, time in the United States, and their applications for citizenship. But ICE agents don't look at that. All they want to know is if you're an illegal alien or not. It doesn't matter if you're trying to obtain a citizenship or lived here for years. They don't look at those components. In addition, as we've learned from earlier, these databases are filled with quote-unquote criminals, but not a level of their offense. And even if it does include something about what type of crime these criminals have done, ICE agents once again aren't looking for that. You're simply a name on the list. Now let's say ICE agents get a list of actual criminals. Where do they find them? They would go to their friends and family and ask for the whereabouts of this specific person. Fair, right? But they can also ask about their immigration status and could potentially deport them as well. And a lot of people have been deported like that. So this list of criminals can potentially expand to immigrants who are hardworking individuals who may have no relation to someone who's actually a criminal. ICE also goes to workplaces, restaurants, stores, and asks information about specific people, which again sounds reasonable. They also go to homes, immigration courthouses, homeless shelters, and they don't even wear the uniform. They're literally hidden there in no more clothes and wait outside these places for their target. But they don't just sit around. They ask around in the institutions, and they specifically target a certain group of people who they do ask.
Her husband, Jose Carlos Rivera Ochoa, was detained today. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents waiting for him out back when he went to throw out the garbage. He was eventually let go because he had his green card on him.
The Alabama Coalition for Immigrant Justice, alongside the Alabama NAACP, responds to the arrest of about 30 undocumented immigrants.
They were following our folks right after they leave home just to get ready for work.
The action that Homeland Security has taken reminds me of what happened in South Africa during the apartheid regime.
In your office, officers were referring to Latinx people as beaners, wetbacks, and spics.
Total lie.
Okay, so those officers
Total
were lying.
lie. That's correct. Let me tell you something. Terry Johnson ain't got a racist bone in his body. Now, if somebody's got something to hide, they better be scared of Terry Johnson, because if they're a criminal, I'm coming after them, and my people are coming after them.
So when ICE agents are looking for criminals and ask these questions, or even when police officers Ben 10 themselves into immigration enforcers, they typically target Hispanics. Multiple studies have shown bias by ICE agents and police officers when they randomly interrogate people or stopping them for trivial reasons that have nothing to do with immigration status. So if we take a closer look in ICE in 2018, ICE predominantly arrested people from countries in either Central America, the Caribbean islands, or with Mexican origins. And yes, 4.5 million out of the 11.5 million undocumented immigrants are Mexican, and 1.5 of them have Central American origins. But that doesn't change the fact that these numbers are heavily skewed towards a specific group of people. For example, the top 5 countries where ICE removed immigrants came from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, the Dominican Republic, and El Salvador, which represent 47 to 53% of the undocumented immigrant population, but 92% of those removed by ICE. They are in these places where they can specifically find this group of people. But you're probably thinking, oh, Raheem, they have to, the ACLU, someone has to look at this injustice. But it's hard for them to do anything when your existence is a crime, because all the laws that protect you aren't there.
That is a warrant. No, it's not. It's a Department of Homeland Security order. It's a warrant. Okay. No, it's not a warrant. It's not a warrant under the Constitution of the United States.
And director of the Detainee Rights Clinic says there's a flip side when they do need a warrant, and it goes a lot differently than when it comes to the criminal court system. ICE officers get something called an administrative warrant. Chan says it's not signed by a judge and limits an ICE officer's authority.
It means that an administrative warrant does not give immigration officers the right to enter your home to make an arrest.
When a person is taken into custody, they have the right to a lawyer. But unlike in criminal proceedings, the government doesn't provide one.
And in the vast majority of these cases, people do not have lawyers when it comes to being represented in immigration proceedings throughout the country.
The ACLU says there is one main takeaway they want people to know.
A lot of individuals don't know that they have the rights and protections of the Constitution.
You see, ICE could violate constitutional rights and get away with it, because apparently the people they target don't deserve it. It doesn't matter if officers go after people in Mexican restaurants. It doesn't matter if they randomly stop people who speak Spanish. It doesn't matter if they didn't have a warrant. The fact is that if a person is here illegally, no court will ever rule in favor of a constitutional rights, because for some reason they don't deserve it. And that was the point of this episode. Look, ICE has a lot of problems at its core, and these problems desperately need to be addressed, just like any other major institution in our country. But we haven't yet acknowledged the larger problem at hand, our own negative and incorrect perceptions of illegal immigration into the United States. In 2019, according to the Pew Research Center, around 51% of Americans believed immigration as one of their top 10 issues. Additionally, a Gallup poll found that 25% of Americans cited illegal immigration as their top issue. For some reason, many believe undocumented immigrants are a part of a larger problem and their problem. But we can't forget about their benefits.
The Yale-bound high school valedictorian who came out as undocumented says most of the reaction has been positive.
In her speech to McKinney-Boyd High School graduates, she talked about overcoming obstacles. And
documented workers here in the U.S., more than half of all hired farmers are estimated to be undocumented.
The sector has the highest share of unauthorized workers by a lot. Following farming is construction, where about 15% of its workers are undocumented. And overall, about 5% of the US workforce consists of undocumented immigrants.
I've been living in the United States for the past 18 years. I am undocumented and I pay my taxes every year.
Here's the reality. We as human beings overemphasize certain issues. Whether we realize it or not, it is in the back of our minds that, oh, undocumented immigrants steal jobs, hurt the economy, commit crimes. But if we break away from our unconscious prejudices, we can see that this is not true. 60% of them have been here for the past decade. Immigrants have contributed $300 billion to the Social Security Trust Fund. Undocumented immigrants pay an average of $11.4 billion in state and local taxes a year. And over 7 million of them are in the civilian workforce. Despite the perceptions of them being criminals, only 7% of them have been convicted of a crime and 2.5% of them are felons. Yet we ignore this reality. We have created a narrative in our heads that illegal immigrants are the enemy, and we use them as scapegoats by pinning the nation's problems on them. So if so many ridiculous notions are believed by Americans, why wouldn't our law enforcement officers believe the same? If we don't fuel this incorrect perception, ICE agents potentially don't target the Hispanic community. Maybe ICE would systematically change to catch criminals, not everyday people. Or they would be given less power over the citizens, because even they know they are wrong in who and how they deport sometimes. Same goes for our politicians. If politicians from both sides didn't use immigration reform as a way to score political points, maybe children wouldn't be separated from the families. Maybe this guy wouldn't have won his election. We've seen this before in American history. In the 90s, we wanted to be tougher on crime and ended up supporting a crime bill that disproportionately affected Black Americans. In the early 2000s, Americans wanted someone to blame so badly after 9/11, we went to war at the expense of millions of lives in the Middle East and our own soldiers. And today, rather than focusing on pressuring issues like child poverty, racial inequality, or gun violence, we choose to put our focus on removing a group of people who are living in this nation who want to live more than just a normal and happy life. However, I don't want to discredit anybody's experience, and I really do understand that, like any other demographic, undocumented immigrants does have its fair share of bad individuals. And ICE has done a sound job of tracking these undocumented immigrants who are rapists, murderers, and actual threats to public safety. I'm not going to deny this. But how does deporting honest, hardworking families and individuals protect us? Our false ideology has caused us to perceive families as horrible criminals, and it is simply wrong. Now, I know to an extent, yeah, they overstay their visas or cross the border illegally, but we can look at this from a total different perspective. Instead of ICE spending $9 billion on detaining families, let's make a different agencies that helps them prosper in American society. This agency would help with the immigration process for illegal immigrants and make deportation a less intimidating process, and could potentially help us understand the economic impacts undocumented immigrants have in this country, in addition to helping them seek citizenship. Look, the point is, despite their inhumane actions or methods, they have removed criminals. And I'm saying to let them remove criminals. Let them preserve national security. But we need to hold them accountable. We need to do more research on who ICE affects and how they're affecting people. I've provided as much outlines as I can. But we need to figure out what exactly is going on. ICE doesn't even release the full data on who, how, or how many they arrest. You know how difficult it was to make this episode without that kind of information? I had to look up so much stuff. In addition, families and ICE should have no relationship. That should be the job of another organization, as I was explaining earlier, or a current one, who will fight for their rights and humanity and a fair deportation process, not one that instills fears in the hearts of children and the minds of parents. Because at the end of the day, we're all humans and we all deserve a fair shot at life and happiness. Thank you.